After the George Floyd incident in the spring, somehow we've all concluded that George was a victim of a lack of social awareness rather than a victim of his own opioid amphetamine experimental cocktails. Instead of concluding, hey, maybe if George had taken a chill pill instead, all of this could have been avoided, somehow conventional wisdom has become George might still be walking around today if only athlete activists had said more. And so the NBA started the trend. Players swapped their names for social justice slogans. If only George had seen Black Lives Matter alley-oop it to equality, then things would be different somehow. If only George had considered the enlightened philosophy of group economics, whatever the hell that even is. Major League Baseball followed soon after, and the job was much easier for their logistics guys. Just swap around the league letters and call it good. No report yet on how many addicts this move caused to sober up, but I'm sure those statistics are coming. And for the summer, the NFL sat and watched this nonsense, seeing not only the total void of logic, but the business consequences of it. The NFL watched the NBA's viewership decline. The NFL watched MLB's viewership decline. And still the NFL made the business decision to repeat the same mistakes. The NFL tried to be a little more subtle about it, opting to allow players to place a social justice slogan or the name of a supposed victim from an approved list on the tiny space on the back of their helmets. The NFL called this the Say Their Stories campaign, with 87 names available for players to honor. So on the one hand, the NFL tightly controlled what sort of messages players could use or who they could honor, implying the NFL didn't want to suffer from the excesses of the NBA or MLB. But on the other hand, the NFL didn't even bother to do their homework, making you wonder why they wanted the tight control at all. The NFL's list of names approved for honoring includes all the usual suspects of highly questionable victimhood, in addition to George Floyd, on whom the facts are still coming in, and the more they do, the less this looks like a murder case. Other options include Michael Brown, who robbed a store and beat up a cop and tried to steal his gun, Jacob Blake, who violated a restraining order against a woman he allegedly sexually assaulted before refusing to stop reaching for a knife against police orders, and Rayshard Brooks, who drove drunk, stole a police taser, and tried to shoot police with it, among others. And if it's not insulting enough to honor people who attacked police and civilians alike, one of the stories on the list is an outright Jussie Smollett-style hoax. Althea Bernstein is on this list. We're supposed to say the name of this idiot who claims that MAGA hat henchmen in Hawaiian shirts doused her in lighter fluid and lit her on fire at a stoplight.
She says she was stopped at a red light and listening to music when she heard someone yell the N-word. 4 men, all white. She says one used a spray bottle to deploy a liquid on her face and neck and then threw a flaming lighter at her.
I don't even remember anything.
Yeah, you don't remember anything because you made up everything, not just according to common sense scrutiny of your story, but according to local and federal police investigation. And it's not just that there's no evidence it happened, it's that it didn't happen. Exhaustive review of video from cameras at intersections shows she never stopped in the way she described, and no group of Boogaloo Boy face arsonists is ever seen patrolling the streets. It did not happen. And the results of that investigation were publicly known by October 3rd. But here's the NFL 2 weeks later still telling you to say her name. Forget about the names. Let's start saying the truth instead. Better yet, just say hut hut and that's it. We tune in for football, not propaganda. But I suppose there is educational value, albeit accidental. Through the NFL's misguided honoring of another supposed victim this week, I learned about another story to which I'll now have a response the next time someone pushes it as an example of racial injustice. Here's another name to say, according to the NFL on Wednesday, Dre'Shaun Reid, also known as Sean Reid. His mom says he deserves justice. He's from Indianapolis, so Colts linebacker Matthew Adams is supposedly set to wear Reid's name. I've seen conflicting reports on this. Some say he will, some reports say he instead opted out and he has no plans to wear Reid's name. Whatever the case, the NFL is pushing Reid's name this week as someone to honor in pursuit of inspiring change. And apparently we're all supposed to apologize to Sean's mom. Ironically, it was Sean apologizing to his mom while live streaming the police chase after which he died, seemingly fully aware that his criminality was about to catch up to him.
I love you, Mama. I'm so sorry I put you through this. I love love you, though.
We don't have to speculate what happened to Sean Reid. He live streamed the whole thing before, during, and after the death that he chose, with full explanation of why he chose it. But before we get to that video, there's important prior context to cover. You'll be shocked to learn that this isn't an otherwise innocent man caught up in the lethal racism of the system. This is a man doing everything he can to make the system as lethal as possible. In September 2019, Sean Reid was arrested on felony counts of threatening officers after he was caught driving with a suspended license and sipping codeine. And it turns out that was the boring way to get around town. Sean had to up the thrill factor, so in the spring, he started just shooting a gun from his car at random and posting the video on Facebook. And this was multiple instances. This was drive-bys, not drive-by. Evidence from Sean's phones showed records of at least 2 separate instances, and those were just the ones that he himself was stupid enough to document. This is important character context, but it's important fact pattern context too, because the details of the gun he used are important in connecting the dots of his death. It's a customized Glock. It has a distinct orange goldish slide. And the customization isn't a project of Sean's craftsmanship. He stole it from a pawn shop in Texas, and then he scratched off the serial number. So we know he used that gun in previous crime, which means its innocent involvement in the police shooting in which Reid died is highly questionable at best, and yes, that gun was on him that day. You can see it right there on Reid's waistband as he's running away from the cop. So we have the gun used in prior crime present at this scene. Fast forward to what happened at Sean's death in May. Well, Sean was up to his usual antics of driving around recklessly until a police pursuit followed, so Sean fired up his live stream to play Grand Theft Auto in real life.
There's 3 of them, y'all. Damn, look at all of them. Little on me. Yeah. High speed chase of the year goes to me.
It's part recreation, part flight from his criminal liabilities. He makes several references to having to flee because of things that he's done and things he has on him. Presumably, he means drugs or that gun.
I can't stop you. I know I got that shit on me. You're not finna catch me. I'll go. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not going to jail today. No, sir.
Well, technically correct. He didn't go to jail, at least for this one, but still, file undertakes that aged poorly.
Fuck with a real nigga. Who y'all fucking with? I'm my mama, you not me, bitch. Come on, baby. Fuck with a real nigga when it comes to this shit.
Okay, file undertakes that aged even more poorly. Now, you could take that challenge to F with a real N-word as an implied threat against the police, but we don't have to do that. He says explicitly, I am going to start shooting.
I'm gonna start shooting. I ain't gonna catch you.
Shortly thereafter, he parks his car and takes off on foot. An officer shortly behind him stops his car and follows closely. And as you can see on surveillance camera video, the pursuing officer is not an agent of the Klan, but an oppressed person of color himself. Systemic racism works in mysterious ways. Sean is running away while still streaming from his phone. Again, you can see the Glock in his waistband. The officer tases him. Sean falls to the ground. It's off camera. But Sean turns to face the cop, and there's gunfire from both men. Sean may have had the chase of the year, but he lost the shootout of the year. Last month, a grand jury declined to indict the shooting officer, finding insufficient evidence to bring charges. Per the investigation, there were 15 total shots fired, 2 from Sean, 13 from the officer. Who shot first is not clearly known, but given the timing of the shots, the casings recovered, and the fact that you can see casings fly in opposite directions on the stream, we know both men fired upon each other. And even if Sean didn't fire first, we know he had no problem pointing his gun at random things. We know he said explicitly, I am going to start shooting. It's not an unreasonable inference to believe that Sean pointed his gun and left the officer no choice. The NFL wants us to heed his mom's calls for justice, but where exactly is the injustice? This case is a clean example of persistent endangerment of others, refusal to submit to lesser forms of police force, and leaving the officer no other option by forcing him to choose between your life or his own. The last desperate attempt of the activists was to emphasize this reaction from a cop upon seeing Sean's body.
Looks like it's gonna be a closed casket, homie.
Now maybe that's unprofessional, or maybe that too is deserved, but what isn't debatable is who chose that casket and who chose a bodily condition unfit for viewing. It wasn't the system that imposed that upon Sean. It was his own repeated individual decision-making. He routinely put people in situations where someone has to end up in the casket. And if you play that game, eventually it's your turn to hop in. So thanks, Roger Goodell and the NFL. We now can say Sean Reid's name. On the list of propaganda points we know how to debunk. I don't think that was your intent, but hey, neither was shrinking your viewership, and you remain committed to that cause nonetheless as well. Oh, but that's just because of coronavirus, obviously. Is it? Okay, well, explain to me why all the people not in the stands aren't at home watching on their TVs either then. There has to be another factor in play. To be fair though, the NFL has been celebrating criminals for years, so I suppose this is nothing new, but at least those criminals had skill. Sean Reid needs to work on his aim, or needed to work on his aim. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.